Hi, welcome back, friends. Excited to have you back in for another episode today. And today we will be discussing parts work. And parts is something that comes up a lot in the therapy world. If you've ever watched the movie Inside Out, you will have a little idea about what this is. But we're going to dive into parts as looking at different aspects of our mind. So it can be emotions, everything from anxiety or embarrassment, fear, can be happiness, it can be joy, it can be all these things, or it can actually be other parts of us like our inner critic or our inner child, all these things as different aspects of our mind. So on today's episode, we're going to explore this and also be able to empower you to look at what parts look like for you and how do you take care of your parts. All right, welcome to the show. I am really looking forward to this conversation today because what I have found, not only for myself, but with others who I have worked with, is this becomes very powerful to understand when we're looking at the mind and looking at us as a whole. And what we spoke about a moment ago around parts here is understanding that we have different aspects of our mind that can get into conflict. And we know that a kingdom divided or a house divided never stands. And it's very hard to live a very balanced, harmonious life or to be able to achieve your goals when you have aspects of yourself that are in conflict. Now, to clear this up, I'm not referring to any kind of dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia or multiple personalities. That's not what we're referring to when we talk about parts here. But most people have seen the movie Inside Out, and it's a really great representation of what parts work is there's these different aspects of us within our mind that cause us to feel certain ways or to respond to things in certain ways. And a lot of times those parts can get into conflict with each other, but also with our true authentic self. Or sometimes, our child part is in conflict with our inner parent part, and really coming to a place where everybody is working on the same team. Everybody is working for the highest good of you. Now, let's explore what are really parts. Like, what does that word actually mean? So, beautiful question that you're asking yourself is parts, very simply stated, are different aspects of our mind that get into conflict with one another. So, let me give you a fun example to look at is let's say we have a part of us that wants to eat kale all the time. This is the part that is a gym rat, wants to be at the gym. I'm into all the sups. I'm into all the red light, PFM mats, all the things. It's this part that really just would like for us to eat kale for every meal. It thinks that kale is the most beneficial thing that we could do. And then on the other side, we have a part that wants to eat brownies. This part that likes how we feel when we eat brownies, that likes all the memories that come with eating brownies, or it feels good, or it makes them feel special, all those things from the brownies. And so on the one side, we have this one part that is the kale devouring crazy part. We have the other part that's equally as crazy, thinking that we could eat brownies for every single meal and everything will be good. So when these parts become in conflict with one another, what's going to happen is this rodeo back and forth between two parts, really at incredible amounts of conflict with one another. So the kale part's coming at the brownie part's coming back at the kale part. Like this just turns into like a UFC match between the two, and we're not getting anywhere. So we might have two meals where we eat kale and then like the other brownie part's like, I'm miserable, I hate this. So then we go eat a pan of brownies. And now what are we doing is this big, again, rodeo back and forth of these two parts in conflict. So, ideally, what would happen here is our inner authentic self, our highest self, steps in and says, okay, like, Kale part, I see where you're coming from. I know that you're trying to do the best for me because all parts are inherently good and they're doing a job for us that they've usually been doing for an incredibly long time. But it doesn't make sense for us. It doesn't really bring us any kind of joy, and it even nutritionally doesn't make sense for us to eat only kale for every meal. And then it turns to the other part and it says, okay, brownie part, I know that you really like the way that you feel when you eat brownies. Brownies remind you of these special memories, all these things, but eating brownies is not going to be our best decision either. And that authentic self steps in and says, like, where can we find a middle ground? Like, maybe we don't need to eat kale every meal, but we don't need to eat brownies. But how can we meet in the middle and have that conflict resolution type conversation? Now, it gets really interesting when we look at emotions because emotions can definitely show up as parts in things like anxiety, panic, depression, fear, anger, any of those emotions can often manifest for us as parts. And what I mean when I say this is that they almost become like an old friend. Like, when anxiety shows up, you are aware of what it feels like in your body when anxiety is here. You usually have predicated with the anxious driving thoughts so that, like, um, things aren't working out for me. How am I going to handle this situation? What is going to happen on the other side of this? Like, everything feels so overwhelming. All those thoughts that come before even the emotion of anxiety become wrapped into this part essentially. And now we have this part that's doing this very ineffective job for us, but we know it. We know it like an old friend, and we know it when it shows up. That can be true of any of the parts when they come up as emotions, as we know them, we feel them, we're familiar with them. But we we need to really be aware of giving them an updated programming. They need an updated job. And seeing that the job that it was doing before, this worrying or always feeling like it needed to be doing something or whatever it is realize that that's not best serving me in the here and now, and we need to give it a new job. So I'm going to talk to you about how we actually go about doing this. But I also want to explore and dive into a couple other aspects of parts that are very, very enlightening to understand. We all have three primary internal ego states. And the ego is a really popular word that's been thrown around a lot. But understanding that we have our internal adult, we have our internal parent, and we have our critic, parent slash critic, and we have our internal child. Three main parts of the ego that often can get into a lot of conflict with one another. Now, this becomes quite an eye-opening dialogue when we have this for people, and I want you to hear this to understand it. Of when we're talking about the inner parent, is it's not always necessarily like, okay, what's mom or dad or whoever that represents doing for me in the here and now? It's actually the representation of who they are to you in your own mind. So it's the real estate that they're taking up for you within your own mind. That's what we're talking about here. Very, very, very often is there an internal state of conflict between the inner parent and the child. And usually these start to become a thing from earlier in our existence, earlier within our childhood, where we started to feel this discord in this relationship. So, whether we got hurt or we felt sad or we felt guilty or angry or what happened, is it's this internal conflict that begins to happen. Now, let me give you an example of what this looks like because you may not realize that this is actually happening for you. So what happens is, let's say that you make a decision, you do something, um, whatever that is. Now, depending on how it goes, right? If we perceive the situation to go well, we might think of it one way. If it doesn't go well, then we're going to think of it a different way. Let's say it didn't go ideally how we wanted to, like maybe we didn't perform in a certain way. We had a conflicting conversation with somebody, or maybe we're just not measuring up to our own expectations. Or this inner dialogue can just happen all the time, 24/7. But this is what this looks like when we're coming from the inner adult or the inner critic, is this language pattern around, you should have done this. You didn't do that. You need to do this. You have to be this. You're not measuring up here. You're never, whatever, going to be enough, blah, 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 fill in the blank. It's this constant, really harsh, critical language towards yourself, and you're never going to be good enough. It's never going to measure up. There's always going to be this underlying current of, I'm not feeling good enough, or I'm insecure in who I am, or I'm not feeling adequate in some way, or there's a scarcity mindset showing up. This inner critic, this inner adult really takes the reins and runs with this. And it's this constant drive of, I need to do better. I need to show up better. I didn't do this. You have to do that. It's just this constant dialogue. And it is crazy how, when you start to become aware of this, which you will after listening to this podcast today, is you start to pay attention to this dialogue showing up and realizing, holy crap, this is showing up everywhere in my life. Literally in every single decision that I'm making, this inner critic is showing up, telling me either I didn't do it well enough, or no one's ever going to love me because I did this, or I don't feel like I'm good enough as is, or there's something wrong with me, or whatever. It's this constant dialogue that shows up, and it can be so loud. This part, the inner critic, the inner adult, loves the microphone. Now, the inner child is exactly what it says. It's this really delicate inner child part of us that is usually hurting in some way. It usually feels alone. It usually feels unloved. It is basically suffering in its own way because of whatever has happened. Now, this becomes a fun one to dissect with people, and that's what I love to do, is looking at where this is coming from. But when we look at the inner child, that depending on our experience growing up and depending on what things looked like for us is going to dictate what our beliefs about ourselves, what are the stories we're carrying, what are the narratives that we have. And so it's not always just our parents. So we don't want to come down that it's all of our parents' fault. That's not what we're going at here, and that's not the truth. But other caregivers, teachers, other kids, priests, or people at church, that whole dynamic, that all very much influences how what we start to believe about ourselves, the stories we start to tell ourselves, all of those things. And if the inner child, or in those times, if that child got hurt, usually we start to see some protectors come on board. And these protectors are exactly that. I think of like just the ultimate like soldier, essentially. It was like you were getting nowhere. It also almost makes me think of Game of Thrones. So that's what I think of with protector, is the protectors are usually protecting the child part because the child part has been hurt before. And the job of that protector is to make sure that that never happens again. So if you imagine a bridge, let's say a river, and a bridge is over the top of it, and you're standing on one side of the bank of the river. On the other side of the bridge, you have the child part, and the child part is over there, and they're hurting, and they're alone, and they're suffering. But you have this protector standing at the entrance of the bridge, and it says, you're not coming over here. Like, we're not going to go do this. We're not going to feel emotion. We're not going to handle these old beliefs, these old memories. We're not going to do this. And it really, they put their feet in to the ground and they are not going anywhere. And what happens is this really shuts us off from fully experiencing life, from fully connecting in our relationships to creating and manifesting what we want in our lives. And it really closes us off because we're living in this old dialogue. We're living in this old programming that's no longer for us. And then we have this part of us that's suffering over there. And what we need to do in the context of parts work is address these protectors. And this becomes having a dialogue with them and realizing, like, hey, we really appreciate the job that you've been doing. We know that you've been trying to keep this part safe and you've been trying to keep us okay and to keep us from getting hurt, but we need you to do another job now. We need you to be this fierce warrior in a different way to actually to help us heal and grow and transform. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I'm sure there's more. But in the work that I do, we primarily do this through hypnosis because it's the best way to access where these parts are within the subconscious mind. That is my preferred method of doing it. There are other ways that you can do it through specific meditations or exercises and things like that. But if these protectors are running the show for you, it's gonna make a lot of this work and a lot of this growth and expansion very difficult because you're always gonna be headed back towards the old methods, which have kept you safe, which have kept that child okay from further hurt, further sadness, further anger, further guilt, all of that stuff. So it has to be addressed. Those protectors have to be addressed and given new jobs, just like all parts. And not only in my own personal work, but also in the work that I do with clients, is you see this really incredible transformation when it comes to parts work. Because now, this part of you that was either holding you back or keeping you from actually figuring out what the narrative is or doing something with it, healing it, really realizing the truth of who you are. Now, this part, or maybe your panic part or your depression part or whatever it is actually working with you in cohesion. And when your mind is working in one solid unit, one unified team, essentially working towards your best interest, your highest goals, anything is possible. Your mind is firing on all kinds of cylinders and networks that you may not have ever thought was possible. And it really opens you up for this incredible experience to life. Now, we've talked about the inner parent, the inner critic. We've talked about the inner child, which again needs to be healed. One other thing coming at that inner child is that a lot of times these specific parts can have a lot to do with specific relationships. So it's not necessarily just based on one event, one time and place where this child felt like they weren't enough or they didn't belong or they weren't loved. Is that's not usually how this works, is that it's kind of a repeated series of events over time. So you're talking about in different situations, perhaps with different people, or perhaps with the same person, but in different ways, started to believe these things to be true. This is where this becomes really powerful in the healing side of things because now we're able to actually go in and heal the relationship. And what comes up a lot when people ask this question around this is like, does this mean that I need to reconcile with that person? Or I need to just like forgive them for what they did or allow them to keep doing the things that they're doing? And that's not the case here when we're looking at the forgiveness side of things. We are looking at who they represent to you in your mind. So empowering that child part, giving them their voice back, showing them how loved they are, how amazing, how capable, how like fully really amazing they are, and allowing that part to just be integrated back together with you. So you don't have that 5-year-old running your life, making decisions for you in your life that way. Finally, the third part of the ego we spoke about was the inner adult. And this is again part of the ego, but it's, I guess, if you want to call it, the more matured part of the ego. But this part can also get into conflict with other parts as well, too. What I found and what you can see in this with parts is that this inner adult can sometimes look like whether it's the spiritual or the mental health, like, advocate, like, okay, we're gonna read all the self-help books. Okay, we're gonna do all of these things. Or it just can become that state of always doing more, always. And it's funny how sometimes, like, in certain stages of your growth, what looks like is a positive thing can also be holding you back in ways, because it's also perpetuating the narrative around there's something wrong with me, or I need to fix this, or I need to do this thing. And so our inner adult can also show up in that way, but generally it's a little bit more um matured and qualified down the line. But nonetheless, the goal is to become integrated with all these parts of you so that they're working together for your highest good. As I mentioned, this can happen through several different tactics and ways. Hypnosis, meditations. There's some really good parts books out there as well too. My personal like top 10 favorite books on this kind of work that will help you to understand it as well too is The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford. In this book, she explores, I think, one of the best gut checking aspects of this kind of work, of parts work, of realizing that a lot of the parts or aspects of other people that we see that maybe we don't like or bother us, that we have that as well too. And that is the introduction into shadow work, my friends, is recognizing, oh, well, that person is kind of racist, or they're saying these terrible things, or they feel this way about a certain group of people, and reconciling it that in some way, like, maybe and on some level, maybe I'm the same way. Maybe I have some subconscious perception towards another group of people, or a certain way a person looks, or how they dress, or how they speak, or anything like that, is realizing if you spot it, you got it. And that 100% is valid for parts. If you spot something in someone else, you for sure have it. And you know why? Is because if it's activated within you, that means you have it, right? If that teenage part, or that child part, or that part that's just like really terrible, if you see that in someone else, then you have it too. Like, on that level, is like, be real with yourself. You have it too in some form or fashion. So I love her work, particularly in exploring this and discovering these things within you of, what are these parts that I see in other people that I can see within myself that I maybe don't want to see, that I maybe don't want to address. And man, powerful work when you start to head down that road and you do some of this shadow work and this self exploration. This will change everything for you. This will totally revamp your entire life. So check out her book for sure. Um, it used to be, and I believe it still is, available on Spotify, that you can listen to it on audiobook, which is really nice because when she takes you through the guided exercises, you can actually listen to them and participate in them rather than just read them. But it is a very life changing book, a life changing experience. So, I hope that you got some really good takeaways from this parts work. The goal overall is to be aware. You can be aware when these parts need something from you, as you are the overall caretaker. N- Know that all parts are inherently good. There's no part in any bad way. And that we can't do surgery on parts. Like, as much as you can say, I don't like my panic part, or I don't like this anxiety part, is there's no way to cut this part of you out. It when it formed for a reason and it's there with you. But you can give it a new job. You can give it an updated job description to do something that will be most beneficial for you moving forward. And we know that we are not here to judge parts. We're not here to tell them how crappy of a job they do. It's all for the best. They're all doing it because they think it's best for us. So start to explore this within yourself. Start to get curious when you feel these things show up, or you see this part of you that's using that language around should have, need to, didn't do. Or maybe this deep part of you, this child part that's reaching out for love, that wants to feel connected in some special way. And get really, really curious about this and just start to explore. Start to become familiar with this. Open up your mind to the possibility of seeing how your mind works in this totally and completely different way. I know that you were walking out of this conversation with a lot to ponder on and a whole new way to look at things. When you think about your mental health, when you think about how do I take care of myself, how do I grow and transform, how do I work in cohesion together with all of my parts, this is the beginning of the conversation. If you feel inspired, you want to dig in and do some more parts work, let's do it. I am totally here for it. Or we can get you connected with some amazing resources and ways to be able to do that. Check out Debbie Ford's book. I'll put a link in the description of the show notes below so you can dive into that. And just get curious. Just try something different. And I promise you, you will walk away feeling empowered. You will feel so much more connected into your inner self. Now, please let me know how you like this episode. Let me know how you like talking about parts work, or if it's something that you've known about, or maybe you've never known about it or heard about it before. But let me know what you think. If you want to explore more about this or some curiosities you may have, give us some comments and some feedback about how you liked the episode. And of course, please like and subscribe because it makes a huge, huge difference to us. And we really, really appreciate your support. You can check out the video version of this podcast on YouTube, hey guys, and get into that side of things. If video is your jam, we're having a lot of fun doing the videos. So we appreciate you. Go explore your parts. Get curious. This will change a lot of things for you. Have a beautiful day wherever you are and go out there and be awesome.